Embattled comedian Bill Cosby is facing allegations of sexual assault from more than 50 women. Those allegations have tarnished Cosby's reputation and the image of the nuclear black family he promoted on the groundbreaking Cosby Show. It's the focus of the November issue of Ebony Magazine. The cover was released ahead of the magazine's publish date, and it has sparked a real discussion about whether Bill Cosby, the man, can be separated from Cliff Huxtable, the role model. Kierna Mayo is the editor-in-chief of Ebony Magazine. When we talk about the Cosby Show, what's the real legacy and the real the impact, especially for African Americans?
Tremendous gravity. This show was an anomaly. There hasn't been a show before it, and there probably won't be one after it that has the kind of symbolic resonance that it did in the 80s when this show came out.
Why?
Because this was the first time that, for Black Americans, I'm speaking now, we were able to see ourselves reflected in this light. You're talking about an upper middle class dad, an upper middle class mom, highly educated, children who are college bound, living in a brownstone, living the perfect life alongside of what's happening in real life Black America, which is hip hop, which is the crack epidemic, which are the Reagan 80s, which we quite frankly struggled our way through in many respects. So this was the first time that Black people really had a moment to have national pride about what was being exported from Black America.
And yet critics have said that it was unfair, that it placed unfair expectations on Black families, that they should be a nuclear family, that they should have a mom and a dad and not be single-parent households, that if they would just pull their pants up and act right and dress right, then the rest of America would respect them.
I think that's a new lens that we are looking through today. I think if you flash back to when the show first came about, that's not quite the conversation that we were having. We were really anxious to show ourselves again in this particular light. The concern now, though, is that respectability politics, I think that's what you're nodding to, may not have served us well. I mean, here we have an African-American president who still, for many Black people, feel is being unfairly tarnished purely because of race. So we have learned that simply pulling up our jeans and not naming our children ethnic names, so-called ethnic names, that isn't enough. That perhaps we need to examine this question of respectability.
Your cover of Ebony Magazine shows the Huxtables.
Yeah.
And it has it behind a shattered glass. Right. What have the allegations, the sheer volume of accusations against Bill Cosby, done to the legacy of the Cosby Show?
Well, that's the question, and that's what we're asking our readers to really weigh in on. We understand that this is a loaded image. There's no question that there has been a fracture to this idea and perhaps to this ideal. So that is what we want our readers to really think about and take away from. For us, you know, as a magazine staff, we really have been thinking long and hard, particularly in this last week since the issue has been out, about implications and whether or not Black people were really ready to have the conversation. We're hearing a lot of support and we're hearing a lot of criticism because of the sensitivity of the family itself, and people want to make sure that we are not saying that you can't separate the two. For me personally, that's a question, but I think for Black America, we all have to ask.
In the article, you quote a consumer brand expert saying every Black girl and boy growing up in the 80s looked at Cliff Huxtable as their dad in their heads. No one wants to imagine his or her father committing any of the acts that Bill Cosby has been accused of. Take that a step further and look at some of the speeches Bill Cosby has given, where he was challenging the Black community to different standards, to higher expectations. Does it undermine those challenges?
Absolutely. It's hugely hypocritical. And that's why we were able to go ahead and do this. Before the segment, we were talking about whether or not this is comfortable for journalists simply because there have not been any charges that have stuck, right? Nothing has come to court. The man has not done a day of jail. However, we know that when 50 or so women make an allegation of the sorts that have been lodged against him, that it is imperative that we listen, that the likelihood that there is some guilt is just beneath the surface, and we just can't pretend that that's not the case.
There have been some notable celebrities who've come out in defense of Bill Cosby, notably Felicia Rashad. Malcolm Jamal Warner, of course, Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show, had this to say. I want to play it.
Sure.
Throughout, even since the show, when we've had images that perpetuate the negative stereotype of people of color, we've always had the Cosby Show to hold up against that. And the fact that we no longer have that kind of leaves us not in a great place in terms of having the wide scope of the images of people of color.
He's kind of getting at how this undermines the personification of the black family in America. You also have an article, though, in the same issue that talks about the Obama family in the White House. Are the Obama families, can they replace the Huxtables in terms of a family to strive after?
That's a great question. I would say no. I would say what the Obamas represent is actually something different. It's a real-life version, if you will, of what we were aspiring to with the Cosbys. But the fictitious nature of this is what allows us to have a whole bunch of fantasy, right? The things that we know that are real about the president, he used to smoke cigarettes. We never knew that about Dr. Huxtable. There are some things that are wrapped in the fantastical ideal that are very different than looking at a real-life family, even if it's the first family.
You know, the thing is that there's always a danger when you put someone on a pedestal.
Yes.
Pedestals are notoriously unstable, and more likely than not, somebody's going to fall off. Is it fair to put anybody, even Bill Cosby, up on that pedestal?
I don't think that it's fair. I think that it's real. It happens. We all exalt figures that we admire, that we look up to. I mean, this is a country that is fueled by popular culture. There's really no way around people having a higher standard and a deeper investment in families like this, in Bill Cosby himself and in what he represented. And I think that that's part of why this is so controversial and for many people so painful. They simply can't let go of that ideal. And for Black people, again, in 1984, we didn't have that much representation, and in 2015, we have some, but not enough.
It's really tragic all around. It's tragic for the women who clearly have so much pain surrounding these episodes.
Yes.
But again, for people who are trying to come to grips with what has devastated a legend in their minds.
Yes,
right?
it's when we approached the story, we talked about just Black trauma and how, for us as an African-American family, we're struggling as though this happened in our own home.
Kierna, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
The November issue of Ebony Magazine hits newsstands nationwide Tuesday, October 27th.